Hi, everyone. I'm Antonio Mayo, and I'm part of the M365 Voice podcast. This is the second video in a series where I'm showing you how to set up, run, and view big data analytics in SharePoint Online using Project Archimedes from the Microsoft Syntax product family, along with Microsoft Graph Data Connect, Azure Synapse, and Power BI. If you haven't seen my first video in this series, check it out to see how you set up all of the prerequisites you need for Project Archimedes. In this second video, I'm going to show you how you configure and run a simple pipeline through Azure Synapse, which will use the Microsoft Graph Data Connect service to extract data from SharePoint Online datasets and copy it to an Azure storage container. We'll then take a look at the raw data and talk about what the next steps are. The idea here is that Azure Synapse will orchestrate a pipeline through the Microsoft Graph Data Connect service, which is not throttled. It'll quickly extract data from SharePoint Online datasets. These are datasets that have been made available by Project Archimedes. It'll copy that data to an Azure storage container, and we can then run all of the analytics and reports that we need from Power BI directly against that Azure storage container. Let's see how this works. I'm logged into Microsoft 365 and Azure once again as a global admin. Now, for the observant, you'll notice that I'm actually logged into a different tenant here than my first video where we're setting up all the prerequisites. This tenant actually is another tenant that I have where I've already set up the prerequisites and the data sets have already been published. I've waited the required 48 hours for Microsoft Graph Data Connect to activate and to publish the data sets, and then another couple of days for them to become available for me to run pipelines against. So I'm using a different tenant here. This tenant is instantiated in a US data center, so we're going to see that consistently through the rest of this video. Now, we're going to come over here to Microsoft Azure. Now, here in Azure right now, I'm in Azure Active Directory, but I'm going to come here and I'm going to look for Azure Synapse. Now, you can also see it in my recently viewed items there, but we can quickly type Azure Synapse here, and we want to go to Azure Synapse Analytics. Now you can see here, I already have one workspace from some previous work that I've done with Project Archimedes, but we're going to start from scratch. We're going to create a brand new Azure Synapse workspace. So once you come in here, you're going to click on Create. And that's going to bring up a screen where we choose our subscription. And again, I'm doing this with a free trial subscription. There's actually a lot you can do in here with a free trial if you haven't used an Azure pay-as-you-go free trial yet. So I highly encourage you to try this with the free trial subscription, and then there's no cost to you while you're trying this out. Now, we're going to select our resource group that we created last time during the prerequisites. So in this case, it's MGDC resource group. Now here, I need to create a managed resource group where Azure Synapse is going to put any additional artifacts that it needs to create. So I'm going to call this MGDC underscore managed resource, managed underscore resource group 2. And you can see here some of the prerequisites around the names and so on. It can only be a maximum of 90 characters. It only allows for alphanumeric characters, periods, underscores, commas, sorry, hyphens, parentheses, and you cannot end it in a period. And it must be unique across your, must be unique within your selected subscription. So there, I think we've got a unique name for that one. Now we're going to give our workspace here a name, and this one we're going to call MGDC workspace 2 because we already have a 1. And again, there's a number of restrictions around how you can name these items. Now, in this case, you'll remember in my prerequisites video, my Microsoft 365 tenant was instantiated in Canada, in the central Canada region. In this case, I'm using a different tenant, and this one is actually instantiated in East US, so the East US region. So I'm going to choose that region here. Again, the really important point here is that the region you choose must match the region of your Microsoft 365 tenant. So ensure that that is in fact the case. Okay, and we're going to come down here a little bit. We're going to leave Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 created. I'm going to give ourselves I'm going to give ourselves a new name here for the account. That's my previous one. So here I'm going to create a new one. Actually, no, I have to use that one. That was just created. here, actually. That's my storage account name that we created previously during the prerequisites. And then the file system will automatically be filled out here. This is the actual file system or directories that was created within that Azure storage container from the prerequisites. Okay, so once we've got those filled in, we're going to click Next Security. And now this is going to bring us to the security tab. Here, we're going to switch this authentication mechanism to use only Azure Active Directory authentication. Okay, and that simplifies our authentication here. And then we're going to click Review and Create. Okay, validation was successful. And we're going to click Create there. Okay, now the deployment is in progress. We're going to wait for that deployment to complete. All right, there we go. Our deployment's complete, and we can see over here on the right side that deployment succeeded. We're now going to click on Go to Resource Group. Okay, so this is now our resource group, and we can see that it contains that earlier workspace that I had, along with the new workspace here. So MGDC workspace 2. So we're going to select that workspace. This is going to take us into the Azure Synapse workspace that we just created, MGDC-workspace-2. Now from here, down around the middle, kind of on the left side, Open Synapse Studio. We're going to click on Open Synapse Studio on this workspace. All right, now once we're in the workspace, there's a number of icons here down the left-hand side. You could see Home, Data, Develop, Integrate, Monitor, and Manage. We want to go to the Integrate icon, so the fourth one down from the top. And this is where we actually configure our pipeline. Now we're going to click on this plus right here to add a new resource to our pipeline. And we're going to choose Copy Data Tool. Now, this is probably one of the simplest pipelines that we can create. This is a really simple configuration that is simply going to copy data from a source to a destination. Okay, now here we want to keep options for built-in copy task. We want to keep this one selected. We are also going to choose Run Once Now. Okay, and we're going to click Next. We're going to leave Run Once Now selected. We're going to click Next. Okay, and now we need to configure our data source. So we're moving on to step 3 here. Now, the source data is going to be Microsoft 365. So we're going to leave source type set to all. Under connection, we're going to configure new connection. And here there's a number of different connections that we can configure. Here we're going to type 365, and we're going to choose Microsoft 365. I'm going to click Continue. Now, here we need that application ID and that secret that we recorded in our prerequisites in order to configure the data source. This is what gives us access to the data source. So see here where we have service principal ID. This is where we would copy the application client ID from our prerequisites, that value that we saved in our notepad file. And then where it says service principal secret, this is where we copy our client secret that we created. Now remember, we configured both of those during the app registration step. Right, now here we're going to click test connection in order to validate. Great, our connection was successful. Okay, and we're going to configure create, or we're going to click create. Okay, and it was successfully created. Now, here's a really interesting step. This is where we choose our data sets. Now you can see there's a number of different data sets here available from Microsoft 365. There's many of them available to us. We could extract data for many different purposes. In this case, however, we're going to choose from 3 specific data sets that are related to Project Archimedes. Now, if you followed Project Archimedes and some of the fantastic blogs from Jose Barreto from the Microsoft team, there are a number of preview data sets that you might have used down here. You'll see there's document sharing dataset preview, SharePoint group dataset preview, SharePoint sites dataset preview. These were the early preview data sets. We don't really want to use those anymore. Now the public preview data sets have been made available. Those were from the private preview. The public data sets have been made available, and they have slightly different names. You can see them now. Here, we're going to look for basic data set SharePoint sites. So you'll see this one here, basic data set v0.sharepoint sites v1, basic data set v0 SharePoint permissions underscore v1, and then basic data set v0 SharePoint groups v1. Right now, for this example, we're just going to choose one of these. I'm actually going to choose the permission data set just for fun. Okay, but these are your now public preview data sets that you should choose from. Okay, so we're going to choose that one data set there. Okay, I'm going to click Next. Okay, now we get to filter our data. Now, the filter we're going to choose for this example is snapshot data. Now, in this case, we need to choose a start time and an end time for the snapshot. Now, what happens in this case is if I choose the same date and time for the snapshot, and you have to choose this at least 2 days ago. So you have to choose at least 2 days in the past. All right, so 2 days in the past would be, let's see, 29, 28. I'm actually going to choose 27th for good measure. Okay, so I'm going to choose July 27th, time is 000. Now for the end time, I'm going to choose the exact same time, so 000. When I choose the same date and time for the start and the end time, it's going to get the complete data set. If I choose different times for start and end time, or different dates, I mean, for start and end time, it's going to actually get a delta data set. And in the future, I'm going to do a video just around capturing delta data sets because those can be really useful once you have the full data set. For this example, I actually want to capture the full data set. Now, there are some important limitations here around the dates that are important to know about. The valid dates go back from 23 days ago to 2 days ago. So you can see here when I drop this down, I can only go back a certain distance away. I can go up to 23 days back. In this case, I'm going to leave it at July 27th for start and for end date. In addition, I can't query dates before I enable the SharePoint Online data set. So you remember in the prerequisites, we enabled the Microsoft Graph Data Connect service. I can't query any dates before that. So you'll remember we enabled that service. We had to wait 48 hours for the data sets to become available. We then, we have to query at least 2 days ago, so 2 days in the past. So really, if I'm enabling the Microsoft Graph Data Connect service, and then I'm going to try to run this as soon as possible, I need to wait 4 days for that to be valid. So in this case, I've enabled this in this tenant some time ago, so we should be good with these dates here. Okay, now I'm going to click Next. All right, now I have to configure the destination data store. So we're on to our next step, step 4. So again, here I'm going to click New Connection. And here I'm going to choose Azure Data Lake Gen 2, because that's how we configured our storage container. You'll remember. Now in this case, I'm gonna leave this name here. Actually, I think I've used that name before, so I'm going to give that a different name. And you'll notice here the name can't be updated later. Actually, sorry, I'm going to leave that just as number 1 there. Okay. Now, here, once again, name, description. Now, under authentication type, I want to choose service principal in this case, because again, I'm going to use the client ID, the app ID, and the client secret from the app registration. Okay, now here for the storage account name, I'm going to choose the storage account that I created during the prerequisites in this case. In this tenant, it was called MGDC Storage 2. Now for the service principal, again, I'm going to use the application client ID from my app registration. And from my key, I'm going to use my client secret, again, from that app registration. Remember, I retain those two values. Okay. And now I'm going to click test connection in order to validate that connection. Connection was successful. So now I'm going to click create. Okay. Now you'll see here that a few options here are already filled in. In the folder path, I need to specify a folder in which I'm going to have the data stored. So I'm going to browse, and you'll remember under MGDC files, when we set up our prerequisites, I created a sites subfolder. So I'm going to choose that. I'm going to click OK. So now my folder path should be MGDC files/sites. Okay, and I'm going to click next. You'll see this gives us a quick idea of what's going to happen here. Data is going to be retrieved from Microsoft 365, specifically from SharePoint Online datasets, that basic dataset V0 SharePoint permissions V1 dataset, and is going to get copied to my storage container, which is an Azure Data Lake Gen 2. Okay, I'm going to click next here. Now that's getting deployed. And this is actually deploying my pipeline. And I'm going to click finish on that. Now here, if I open up that pipeline and I click on that, I can actually see my pipeline here. This is that very simple step that I added, the copy data tool. You can actually make these much more complex by adding additional steps and filters on your data. But for this example, we're going to keep this simple. Now I'm going to move over here to the left side and I'm going to click on monitor, the monitor button. Now here you can see that my pipeline is actually running. It was manually triggered when I deployed it, and it's currently in progress. So I'm just going to review that. I'm just going to refresh that a few times. Now, depending on the amount of data that you're triggering, right? I didn't filter anything. If I have a very large tenant I'm pulling against, this could take a few hours to run. In this case, it's a fairly small tenant, so I'm expecting it's probably going to take about 20 or 30 minutes to run. You'll remember, remember one of the first steps that we configured as part of the prerequisites was creating that data approvers group, because every request to data through the Microsoft Graph Data Connect needs to be approved. Well, this is the time. By configuring the pipeline and triggering it, or every time I trigger the pipeline, it's going to send an approval request. So here, I'm actually going to bring down another browser I have here. Now you'll notice I'm logged into the same tenant, but this time I'm logged in with that data approver account that I created. So here, I'm going to come down to my settings, org settings. I'm going to come down to Microsoft Graph Data Connect here. And I'm going to go to that privileged access management portal. If I click on that, now remember, I need to be logged in here with a member of the data approvers group, but it needs to be a different user than the person that triggered the pipeline just a second ago. So when I created and triggered the pipeline, I was logged in as myself, as Antonio Mayo. But here I'm logged in as the data approver. And we can see we've got a couple of data requests from my previous attempts, but now we've got this one here that was just created today. And it's pending. So if I click on that one, you can see this is the new request that was just sent. and I have the option to approve or deny it. So because I want this to go through, I'm going to click approve. Now, that data request pipeline is not going to go any further until I click approve. So it's important that we check for this step. Another thing that happens is an email is in fact sent to the user who is the approver. So I just approve that request. But for people that are in fact approved, if they, let's just go check this user's email. And we can see that this user does have a brand new pending approval request that was just sent here. So they will get a notification email. Oh, actually, that's an old one. There's the new one that was just sent. So it just showed up a second ago once we logged in, right? So this is telling me, actually, this was the request. The first email I showed you was actually the access request. And this new email that showed up, this is actually telling us that the request is approved. Okay, so let's go back to our previous browser here. And I'm just going to refresh this. Okay, and the pipeline is still running. So we're going to leave that to run, and we're going to come back and take a look at what the data looks like once that request has been done. All right, and we're back. So we waited about 15 minutes, and after refreshing a few times, and I'll do that just one more time, we see that our pipeline run has in fact completed. And we can tell it's completed successfully because the status is succeeded. And we can see here under duration, this pipeline actually took about 15 minutes and 59 seconds, so just shy of 16 minutes. And that's because this is a relatively small SharePoint environment. We don't have a lot of sites within here. We don't have a lot of items within those sites, but we do have some sites, some libraries, some items, and permissions configured throughout. And remember, it was that permission data set that we were trying to extract. So this pipeline completed successfully. It's a quick demo. If I ever need to rerun that pipeline, I can just hover over the pipeline and I can click this rerun icon. And again, I'm on the monitor tab. If I actually go to the pipeline tab and in here I want to rerun the pipeline, I can simply select my pipeline. If I click add trigger, trigger now will actually rerun that pipeline once again. All right. Now that we've run the pipeline, it's extracted that SharePoint permission data set that we saw from this SharePoint environment. Let's go actually take a look at what that data looks like. Now I'm just going to come back here to Microsoft Azure to start over again. Here we've got some of our resources listed, and we can see our storage container, our storage account right here, that MGD storage 2. That's the storage account that we configured during our prerequisites, and then we told our pipeline to use when we configured the destination. So if I click on that storage container and open it up, okay, we see some properties about our storage container. I'm going to click on the containers menu item on the left side. And here we can see that MGDC files, file system. If I click into there, I see my site subdirectory. If I click into there, I can now see a couple of files. Now, the first file here was actually created some time ago on a previous run that I did, but this second file, this is actually what was just created. So this is where our data that was extracted from SharePoint, that permission data set, this is where it was stored. And if I make this column just a little bit wider, we can see that that's simply a JSON file. So all of the data extracted from that SharePoint permission set, data set from my tenant is actually all extracted and stored within that one JSON file. So if I want to actually build a Power BI report on that, I'm just going to target it at that JSON file. Now, if I click on that here, I can see various properties about that file, but most importantly, I can actually download the file here. So if I download the file, I can actually take a look at what the data looks like. And I've actually got it already downloaded here. Okay? And like I mentioned, it's just a giant JSON file. All the data was extracted and stored within this one JSON file. And we could see various properties within here. Every line in this JSON file is one entity's worth of permissions, permission data that was extracted. So with every single line, we can see, the tenant ID, the site ID, the web ID, the list ID, the item type, and so on, and the permissions, the permission role definitions, security groups, users, and so on. So all that is listed here. So you can get quite a significant amount of data into one JSON file if you do have a meaningful size tenant. Now, if I scroll all the way to the bottom here, this file's not that big. This one's only 503 lines. But again, if you've got a really large tenant, you're going to end up with a lot of data within this one JSON file. Okay, so what we've done here today is in this video is we've shown you how to create a new Azure Synapse workspace. We've configured a pipeline within this workspace with the copy data tool, so a very simple pipeline. We configured the source environment, which was SharePoint Online. We chose one of the data sets available. Remember, there's three. One was SharePoint Groups, one was SharePoint Permissions, the other was SharePoint Sites. Make sure you use the public preview data sets, the ones that start with basic data set. We then configured the destination, which was that Azure storage container we created in our prerequisites. And then we ran our pipeline and we took a look at the raw data as well. Our next steps here, and we're going to cover this in the next video, is to configure a Power BI report that points to that JSON file in the storage container and actually lets us gain some insights into what our permissions look like within this SharePoint Online environment. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for watching, and we'll look for you on that next video to complete this process. I hope this was useful. Thanks again.